Welcome back to this new video about ReFramework. In the last videos I talked about ReFramework, which states do we have, and I explained them in detail. Today I will show you a practical example, how to use ReFramework template. If you didn't watch the other videos, please watch them before starting with this video. I will add the links in the video description. First I will show you my process, what I want to implement, then we can start implementing the process. Let's go. I have here an Excel file, which contains the following table. It consists of 4 columns. ID, where I have different IDs, from 1 to 10. Then we have 2 columns, first currency and second currency, where I added different currencies. And the last column is result, where I want to add the result. What I want to calculate here is the following. I want to get, for example, how much is $1 in euro. Let's see how can we do that manually. I will open the browser on Google homepage. Let's write $euro. As you see, we have the following result. It means, $1 is equal to 0.95 euro. And so on. I want to calculate all currencies from the table. At the end I want to write the results in Excel again. This is the process, what I want to implement today. I have also the following requirements. I want to have a queue for the process. And I want to have 2 processes, dispatcher and performer. If you don't know what dispatcher and performer are, please also watch the video about dispatcher and performer on my channel. But for now I will explain the both shortly. Dispatcher process is a process, what we implement to create queue items. It means, we implement a process, where we collect the information we need to create queue items. And then we create the queue items, which should be processed in performer. It means, dispatcher is to create the queue items, and performer is to process these queue items. That's all about the process. Let's start implementing. First I will start with dispatcher process. As you see, we only have one Excel file and we want to create queue items from this file, therefore we don't need to implement the process using ReFramework template. We can do these steps in a normal small process. So I will create a process. First we need to read the Excel file. For that I will add read range activity. I will copy the Excel file path. It's sheet 1, where we have the table. And I will create a variable for the output. It's of type data table. Now we want to create a queue item for each row in Excel file. For this I will add for each row activity. And we need add queue item activity to create a queue item. For this activity we need to add the queue name. But we don't have a queue. So let's first create a queue. I am here in Orchestrator. I will navigate to queues. Then I will create a new queue. Here I will add a name, for example currency queue. And for the auto retry I will change the number to 3. It means, once we get an application exception for the item will be retried up to 3 times. No need to change the other settings. So we have created a queue. Let's see the transactions in this queue. As you see, we don't have any transactions now. Let's go back to UiPath to complete the process. I will add the queue name here, which I already created. I will also add a reference for the queue items. For this I will use the ID column content from the Excel file. It means the ID will be a reference for the queue item. In this way we can better differentiate between the queue items, or also we can get the queue item using the reference, if we need that. And the last thing we have to do, is to add the information for each queue item. It means, we want to store the information in the queue item, which we need in the second process. The information is from Excel file. I will add the following 3. ID, first currency and second currency. We get the values from the Excel file. How does it look like in the queue? We will see it later, how the data is stored in the queue items. That's all for this process. You can add try catch activity or set the queue name and the Excel file name as variables. You can also add some log message activities. But for now I don't want to add anything more. Let's run the process to see if we will get new queue items and how do they look like. I am here in the queue, and we still don't have any queue items. Let's wait until the process is executed. As you see, we have now 10 queue items. We have here the reference. It contains the ID from Excel. We have 10 queue items, from 1 to 10. Let's see the content of each item. For example, this one. As you see, we have here under specific content 3 information. Currency ID, first currency and second currency. These are the same, what we added in the activity, add queue item. And the value for each one is from Excel file. And here we have output, but it's empty now. We will use it later in Performer. Let's see another queue item. It also has the same structure, but other values. That's all about dispatcher process. So we created the queue items in this process. Let's now move on to the second part, Performer process. For this process I will use ReFramework template. The process is created and we have the following structure. First I will edit the config file. So I will change the values. If you don't know what is config file, what does it contain and how to use it, then please watch the following video. I also explained it in detail. I am now in settings sheet. We have these values as default. I will use them, but I will change the value. The first one is the queue name. So here I will write the queue name, which I already created. The second one is the folder, where is the queue or also the other settings like process, assets, etc. I mean the folder in Orchestrator. My UiPath is directly connected with shared folder, so no need to add the folder name here, but I can also add it. And the third one is the process name. You can add here the name of the process. It's not important to write exact the same name as in UiPath or Orchestrator, because this name will be used for logging. So I will add currency performer for example. And we can add also other values, which we need in the process. For example, I will add the Google homepage link, which I need in the process to get the currencies. I want to get the link from Orchestrator assets. I will write here URL. And the value can be empty or I will write this text here. Now I will go to Assets sheet. Here I will add the same name, URL, what I added in Settings sheet. So URL is the same in the both sheets. Now I have to add the asset name in the second column. But I don't have an asset, therefore I will create it now. Here under shared folder I will navigate to assets. And then create new asset. First we have to write a name for the asset, for example Google URL. It should be of type text, because I want to write a link as string. And in text field we add the value for this asset. In my example I will add the following link for Google homepage. And create. Let's copy the asset name, and add it in Assets sheet. And here we write the folder name, shared. We can here also add some description for this asset. And the last sheet constants. Here no need to change anything, but you can edit them if you need specific values or new values for your process. Let's save the config file and close it. Let's now start editing the process. We have here these 4 states: initialization, get transaction data, process transaction, and end process. I will start with the first state. First we set this variable equal to nothing. Then we read the config file, if the config variable is nothing. It means, if we didn't read the config file before. First we have this log message activity. Then we have the following workflow, where we read the config file. We have these arguments. The first one is the config file path. It's here, data and then the name of this file. The second one is the sheets. Here we only add the first two sheets, settings and constants. Assets sheet should not be here. But if you created new sheets, you can add them also here. And the third one is the config variable of type dictionary, where we want to store the data from config file. Let's see the workflow. First we initialize the config variable. Then we go through the first two sheets, settings and constants. We read the data from each sheet and store it in this variable. It's of type data table. And in this loop we convert the content of this data table into a dictionary. For the key we set the content of the column name. And for value we set the content of the column value. So at the end of this loop we have all data from the first two sheets. After that we read the assets sheet and store it in this variable. Then we go through all data in this variable, and we get the asset value from Orchestrator using this activity. To get the value we need the asset name, which is stored in the column asset. The value is then stored in this variable. After reading the asset, we store the value in the config variable. For this we use the name column as key. But for value we use the asset value variable. What happens here exactly? Let's explain it in detail. First we read the assets sheet. We have only this row, which is stored in this data table variable. Now we use the value from asset column, to get the asset value from Orchestrator. As a result we get the following link, which is now stored in the variable asset value. Now we want to add this value to the config variable. Before adding the value, the config variable is as follows. Now we add the asset to config. For the name we use the content of the first column. Its URL, what we already have in config. And for value we use the asset value variable, which contains the link. It means, this link will be added here instead of this text. So after executing this variable, the config variable looks now like this one. This is why we add the same name in settings and assets sheet. We are now at the end of this workflow. Now we go ahead with the next activities. We have here an if condition, to check if this argument is empty or not. So we have these two arguments for the process. They are empty now, but we can use them in Orchestrator, if we don't want to add the queue name or the folder name in config. For now we don't need to use them, because I added the values in config. But if we have values in these arguments, they will be added into the config variable. Here is also the same, but for the folder. After that we have a workflow to kill the applications. We don't have any arguments for this workflow. Let's open the workflow. As you see, we don't have any activities currently. Here we can add kill process activities, to kill the processes in case we have a system exception. Here we should kill each process we use in the process. In my case I will use Excel and Chrome browser. So we have to kill these two applications. Let's add kill process activity. First I will kill Chrome browser. I will set continue on error equal to true. It means, in case the Chrome browser is not opened, we could get an exception. But because we set this property equal to true, we will not get any exception. Let's copy this activity and add it again, to kill Excel application. And this workflow is done. After that we have add log fields activity. Let's see what we have here. We only have this log field, which will be added to the logs. And in this field we set the value from the config file. It's the process name, what we added in settings sheet. After that we have the following condition. Here we check, if this value in config is bigger than 0, and also we check this variable, if it's bigger than the value from config. If it's true, an exception will be thrown. If not, we go ahead. In my case, I have this value in config equal to 0, therefore this condition will be always false and we will not get any exception. But it's better to set the value in config equal 2 or 3, so that after 3 retries we throw an exception. And the last activity in initialization state is a workflow to start the applications, which we need in the process. We have config variable as input argument for this workflow. Let's open the workflow. As you see, we don't have any activities currently. As before mentioned, we need to open Chrome browser to get the results. We have here two options. The first option is to add Open Chrome in this workflow. In this case, the browser will be opened only once in initialization state. Later in the process, after processing each item, we have to navigate to the main page of Google. The second option is to leave this workflow empty. And we add Open Browser later in the process. In this case, the browser will be open for each item. So you have to decide which option is better for you. For now, I will leave this workflow empty. This is all about the first state. Let's move on to the next state, get transaction data. In this state, we get the transaction items from the queue to process them in the next state. Here we have check stop signal activity to check if we got a stop request from Orchestrator. In case we didn't receive a stop request, we move on to else part. Here we have this workflow. In this workflow, we have get transaction item activity to get only one transaction item from the queue. The transaction item will be stored in this argument. We have here the queue folder from config, where the queue in Orchestrator is stored. And also the queue name, from which we want to get the item. After that, we have the following activities, which are executed once we got a transaction item. Here we calculate the following arguments, which we can use later in the next state. Here are the arguments from this workflow. I will delete this argument, because we use a queue and we don't need it. But in case we get the queue item from another source, we can use it. For this process, we don't need it. Now we can change the values for these arguments. You can set the values you want here. You can also add other arguments, if you need that. Or you can also delete these arguments, if you don't want to use them. These arguments are helpful for logging. You will see that later. So let's set the transaction ID equal to the currency ID, which we have in queue. To get the ID, we use the following statement. Let's copy the statement and add it for the next argument. For this argument, I will use the first currency from the transaction item. And for the last argument, I will use the second currency from the transaction item. So we have now the following arguments. The first two arguments are input arguments for the workflow. And these four are output from the workflow. The first one contains the transaction item. The other three arguments contain the values, which we calculated from the transaction item. That's all about the second state. Let's move on to the third state, process transaction. We first set the business exception variable equal to nothing. After that, we have the process workflow. We have these two arguments. The config variable and the transaction item. Let's open this workflow. As you see, we don't have any activities now, only this log message and this comment. Let's delete the comment and add the activities, which we need for the process. So here we should add the activities we need to get the results. It means, we have to do the steps, which I already showed you before, like opening the browser, searching for the currency and reading the value. So first we need to open the browser. If you have an old version of UiPath, you have to add Open Browser activity. But in my Community Edition version, I don't have Open Browser activity, but this one. Let's indicate the browser. And now we have to write the text in Google search, as I did manually at the beginning of this video. For that we need set text activity, or type into activity. I will use set text activity. Let's indicate the search field. Let's now change the values, which we want to add. First, the URL. As mentioned, we want to open Google homepage. We stored the link in asset, and then we added the URL to config variable. So we can use config variable to write the URL here. And now the text, what we want to search for. The text should be, for example, like this one. We write the first currency, and then space, and then the second currency. These two currencies are stored in the transaction item. So we can add them using the transaction item variable in this way. So here we have the first currency, then we have a space, and then we have the second currency. After that we have to click search button. Let's add click activity. And now I will indicate the button. Now after clicking the search button we will go to this page, for example. And we want to get this text. So let's add get text activity. And now I will indicate the text, which I want to read. So we got the text, but we have to store it somewhere. I will store the result in an argument, which I will use later in the next steps. So let's create this argument. It's a variable. I will change it to argument. It's an argument now. I will change the direction to out, because I want to get the value out from this workflow, to use it in the next workflow. So we have open browser, and we use the URL from the config variable. After that we search for the currencies using the transaction item. Then we click search and read the value, which will be stored in the output argument. That's all what we have to do in this workflow. Now we have to store the value from the argument in a variable. I will create the following variable. Now we have the following workflow, to set the status for the process transaction item. We have these three different options, either successful, business exception or system exception. In case the transaction item is successfully executed, we want to store the result in the transaction item, what we got from the browser. So first I will create an argument, to get the result into this workflow. Now in the output we can store the value in the transaction item. Here we set the name of the element, which we want to have in the transaction item, for example result. and the value is from the argument. I will show you later how it looks like in Orchestrator. And here we have add log fields activity. Let's see what we have here. We have the following fields. The values are from the arguments, which we calculated in the previous state. Then we have log message. After that we remove these log fields, which we already added. And here I will set the variable result for the new created argument to give the result for this workflow. So we first open the browser and search for the value. And then we store the value in the transaction item. That's all about this state. So we get a transaction item, and then process it. And we do that for each transaction item in the queue. And so on until we don't have any transaction items more to process. In this case we move on to the last state, and process. In this state we only have this workflow to close the applications after processing all items. As mentioned before, I want to write the result again in Excel. So I can do that here. I can add the activities directly here, or I can create a new workflow and add the activities there. Let's create a new workflow, for example add data to Excel. For this workflow I only need the config variable, because I have all settings there, which I need for this workflow. So I will create an argument. It should be of type dictionary. Let's search for this type. It's dictionary of string, object. So what should we do now? First we need to get all queue items. And from these queue items we read the data. Then we write this data in Excel. Let's do that now. First I will add get queue items activity. For this activity we need the queue name, which stored in the config variable. And now we want to store the queue items in a variable. So I will create a variable. And I will create another variable of type data table to store the data from the queue items. Now I will add build data table activity to set the columns of the new table, which I want to write in Excel. You can add the columns you need to have in Excel. I will add the same 4 columns, but you can also add other columns, or only specific columns. It depends on your need. Now and for each loop we will read the data from each transaction item. As you see, the type argument is automatically changed to queue item. In case this has not automatically happened, you have to select this type. Now I will read the data from the items. I will do that in assign activities as follows. As you see, I am creating a variable for each value, and store the value in the variable. These three variables are to store the content from the transaction item, which I added in the dispatcher process. Now for the result, we get the value another way, because the value is not stored under specific content. It's stored under output. So we get it as follows. After that, I will add these variables to the data table using this activity. Please make sure you write the variables in the same order as the column order to get the correct value in the correct column. After that, we want to write this data table in Excel. So let's add write range activity. For the sheet, I can write the same sheet, what we had in Excel. Or we can write the table in a new sheet. Let's write it in a new sheet, output for example. Here the table. A1. And add headers, to add the column headers in Excel. It's done. Now we have to invoke this workflow and end process state. So I will add it here. And we have to set the input argument. It's done. So we are finished now. We have all steps we need. Let's run the process to see if everything is okay. As you see, it works very good. The bot is searching for the value for each two currencies. The result will be stored in the transaction items. The browser is also open for each transaction item. It's done. Let's open the Excel file to check if the data is stored successfully in a new sheet. As you see, we have this new sheet, output. And we have the table. We have the data from the first sheet and also the results. Everything is okay. Let's now see the transaction items in Orchestrator. How do they look like after executing the process? All items are processed successfully. Let's see the details of this transaction item for example. As you see, we have now data under output. It's the value, which we got from the browser. I added this value using the activity set transaction status. Let's check another item. It's the second item. So here we have also a result, but it has another value. Now I will show you how to publish the dispatcher and performer processes to Orchestrator, so that you can trigger them. I am under packages now. We only have this package. Here is the dispatcher process. I will publish it. Done. And now the performer process. I will publish it also. Done. So now we have the both processes in Orchestrator as packages. Let's create processes from these packages. I will go to Shared folder. Then under Automations we have Processes. And Add Process. First I will create the dispatcher process. I have to select the package. Then the version, if we have more than one version. Here we don't have to do anything. And here we have to set a name for the process. I will write the same name, but you can also write any name you want. And create. So we have created dispatcher process. Let's create performer process in the same way. Select the package and the version. Here we also don't have to do anything. And here the process name. And create. Now we have also performer process. This was the first way, how to publish dispatcher and performer processes. But we can also combine the both processes in one process, so that we only have one package in Orchestrator, which we can use for dispatcher and performer. Let's see how to do that. I will copy the workflow from dispatcher, where I implemented the dispatcher process. I will rename the workflow. And I will add this workflow to performer process. I will copy this workflow to the ReFramework process. So now we have the workflow for dispatcher and performer process. Let's refresh the project now. As you see, we have now here the dispatcher workflow. And now I will enable this workflow as entry point. You will see later in Orchestrator why I did this step. First we have to publish the process again, because we added a new workflow. We have a new version now. Now in Orchestrator I will create a new dispatcher process. But I will use the currency performer package. And the new version. Now under entry point I have new entry point, dispatcher process. I will select this one. It means, once we run this process, the workflow dispatcher process will be executed. Here no need to change anything. And here the process name. And create. As you see, we have updates for performer process, because we published the process. Let's use the new version. And update. Now we have performer and dispatcher processes from the same package. But each process has specific entry point. It means, once we want to run the dispatcher process, only the dispatcher process workflow will be executed. And once we run performer process, the same project will be executed, but here the main workflow will be executed. In this way, we only have one package in Orchestrator, from which we created the both processes. So now you know the both ways, how to create processes in Orchestrator. You can choose the way, which is the best for you. And now I will show you, how to create trigger for dispatcher and performer. Let's start with dispatcher. For this process I will set a time trigger, so that the process is executed on a specific time. I will write a name for the trigger. And now I have to select the process. I will select the second dispatcher process for example. And here I will not change anything, because I am using modern folders. For time I will set the trigger to run the process daily on 10 a.m. That's all, what we need. So we have the trigger for dispatcher. Let's now add a trigger for performer process. For this process I will set a queue trigger. It means, I want to run this process, once I have new queue items in the queue, which I will define here. First I will write a name for this trigger. Then I will select the performer process. Here I also don't want to change anything. And here we have to select the queue for the trigger. It means, I select here a queue, so that performer process will be executed, once we have a new transaction item in this queue. So we have the triggers now for the both processes. We have a time trigger for dispatcher process. It means, the dispatcher process will be executed daily on 10 a.m. This process will create new transaction items. Once we created transaction items, the second trigger, performer, will be executed. So performer has a queue trigger. And here is the queue name. But you can also set a time trigger for performer, for example 10 minutes after the dispatcher process. But this way is better for such processes. Now we are at the end of this video. I hope you could understand how to use ReFramework template to automate processes. We didn't have to do many steps. It was very easy and we had to change only some values, and also to add the process steps, like open browser and get the values. I also explained you how to publish processes in 2 ways, and also how to add triggers for the processes. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe my channel, if you want to see more videos. If you have any questions about the video, or other questions about UiPath, please don't hesitate to write us. We are happy to help you as we can. Happy automation!